Okay, well, let's go over to chapter 26, 1 Samuel 26, and get started here this morning. So I've entitled, and we didn't quite finish last time, so we won't get into the lesson for today until we review a chapter or two. So we're starting in 27. I have entitled this "Living with the Enemy," but let's read a portion of chapter 26. Because we didn't do 26 at all last time, so we'll finish up there. So someone like to read 1 through 5 for us just to get started? Someone like to read that for us? I saw Rick's hand there, if you'd read.
And the Ziphites came unto Saul to Gibeah, saying, Doth not David hide himself in the hill of Hachilah, which is before Jeshimon? Then Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, having 3,000 chosen men of Israel with him to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul pitched in the hill of Hachilah, which is before Jeshimon by the way, but David abode in the wilderness. And he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness. David therefore sent out spies, and understood that Saul was come in very deed. And David arose and came to the place where Saul had pitched. And David beheld the place where Saul lay, and Abner the son of Ner, captain of his host. And Saul lay in the trench, and the people pitched round about him.
Okay, great, thank you. So, like I said, I want to go back just to get the... So remember, through his jealousy, suspicion, all that kind of stuff, along with some demonic influence, Saul had become obsessed with finding David and killing him. I mean, that was his goal, his ambition, his drive, his determination. And then while David and 600 men fled to En-Gedi, Saul with 3,000 of his elite troops came. Saul entered a cave to relieve himself where David and his men were hiding. And so someone urged David to take Saul's life, but he only cuts a small corner of his robe off. And then as they talk, Saul admits that David's kindness reveals, hey, you're not my enemy after all. And so Saul leaves there, and then David continues to be in the wilderness, heads to Maon. And so we saw a lesson from that. The earlier one was grow humility and dependence on God through all the trials and sufferings and wanderings in the wilderness. And this one, do good and trust God to deal with your enemies. Whatever you're going through, difficulties that if you cannot deal with a situation in a righteous, God-honoring manner, which is really wisdom, then don't do anything. Then wait on the Lord. Do whatever you can in a righteous, godly way, but don't cut the corners, don't change your morals, don't lower your ethics and all that kind of stuff. And then we saw Nabal, I think chapter 25. Nabal, a wealthy man, was shearing thousands of animals there where David had gone now to Maon. Included festivity and feasting. In fact, at the end of the chapter, it says he was having a feast like a king. So that sort of tells you what this time was. And so David and his men, without any charge, had been a protective barrier around Nabal's shepherds and animals on many occasions. That's repeated, I think, 3 times in the chapter. So it apparently, either when they first went to Maon or maybe at other times they had gone through that area, but whenever they were there, they were just... without, hey, I'll pay, you pay us so much, we'll keep watch over you, we'll protect you, but that's not, he just did it. So now on an occasion where my thing is no longer working, that's okay, there we go. In this time of need, so David, he's fleeing, and apparently maybe they didn't have enough food supplies, so David asked Nabal for provisions. Really, it has to do with what they'd done earlier and just asking, hey, can you provide for us? We've helped you in the past. And he mocked David, laughed at David. And so David went back and told, he didn't personally talk to David or Nabal. Remember, he sent some servants there, and they mocked David at the message. And so the message came back to David and said, David, okay, we're going to take this guy out. And so had 400 of his men. They all got ready for battle. Heading that way along, before they got there, though, Nabal's wife, Abigail, was seeking to intervene, met David on the march there, and took provisions. And so I just put God sovereignly sent her, telling David that he must not continue with his plan, so that when he was king, in verse 30, and so let's look at that passage there. I forgot what chapter 26. No, it's 25, 31. I think it is. Yes. So let's read 30 and 31 here. And this is Abigail's speech to David. So someone like to read 30 and 31 of chapter 25. So chapter 25, verse 30 and 31. You want? Okay, Brother Cranky.
And it shall come to pass, when the Lord shall have done to my Lord according to all the good that he hath spoken concerning thee, and shall have appointed thee ruler over Israel, that this shall be no grief unto thee, nor offense of heart unto my Lord, neither that thou hast shed blood causeless, or that my Lord hath avenged himself. But when the Lord shall have dealt well with my Lord, then remember mine handmaid.
Okay, so she's talking and she says, hey, you're going to be king in verse 30. And then, don't go what you're planning to do with all these swords and army and so forth. And so it'll be no grief to you. And when you become king, the idea of sorrow, of regret, some remorse, because you made some poor choices, David. You don't want to become king and be, oh man, I wish I had done it differently. And the second one, and then just a question based on the last part of the verse. What was the basis of her statements to David? What was the basis for this, the rest of verse 31? I don't want you to have any grief. I don't want you to have an offensive heart or a guilty heart because of really, and it doesn't say it quite that way, but the rest of it really is the reason that he'd have grief and sorrow. Yes, I just thought before that, though, you would, because that thou hast shed blood causelessly. And the idea is you killed innocent people. David, if you go now with your men and you take out Nabal and all his people, you're going to kill some innocent people, David. And so I don't want you to have this grief. And then the second thing, that my Lord will avenge himself. And I think that's stuck with David. He repeats that a little bit later. We won't look at it. But in other words, David, it's so amazing to me how God was sending Abigail, who really who had no personal contact with David prior to this, could say, David, you're just doing this for yourself. And I think the Spirit of God was helping Abigail to say what she was going to say. Obviously, she wanted to protect her household. But yeah, David, you're just doing this for yourself, to avenge yourself, and you're no longer letting God avenge you. And so we did look at that a little bit, but I think that was an important part just to bring back up again. So David responds to this counsel. The next day, Nabal has a heart attack or a stroke, dies in 10 days later, and as David did what was right, God took care of his enemies. Just a lesson in that. Later, Abigail agreed to become David's wife. And so a third lesson there, learn how God works to hinder your selfish, sinful plans. So never forget, when you're thinking about doing something that's not quite the way it should be, not necessarily a sin, but sort of a foolish choice. Sometimes God will bring people into your life, situations in, and just, trying to, you better think through this a little longer because I want to bless you. I want to help you. Okay, so this is what we didn't cover, chapter 26. So what's interesting, the Ziphites earlier, I think it's chapter 24. I'm not sure I wrote down the reference even on my notes. But they had told Saul earlier, hey, David's in this area. So come on down. And so they had traveled up to Gibeah, where King Saul was, and said, hey, we know where David's at. He's here. And the king said, okay, I want you to do this. I heard he's pretty tricky. So you go down there, you find out where he goes, what he does, the times he goes there, and all the places he I think the word is haunts, all the places that he haunts, all the places he goes. I want to know all the details. It doesn't seem as though Saul gets him when he's in the wilderness of Ziph, because he moves rather quickly. That's where he went to Engedi. So anyway, this seems like a second tip. Maybe they found out some more. And so Saul, so Saul takes his 3,000 elite troops and heads to find him again. And so he's heading that way in verses 1 and 2 here. Okay, I did write it down, put it on the map there. So he went from Engedi, he went down, hit the wilderness of Maon, and then he travels up to the wilderness of Ziph. And so the Ziphites send a messenger up to Gibeah, up to King Saul up in Gibeah, and so he's coming down, and now they're going to meet there in that area. So what do you think David wanted? I know why. Why did David want further verification of Saul's approach? And I put as if he was surprised. And I say that in verse number 4 there of chapter 26. Verse number 4 I think is interesting. David therefore, when he heard, so in verse number 3, and David abode in the wilderness, and he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness. And I don't know if there was a visual aspect of Saul or just, saw in his mind they were coming because of his maybe scouts there. And so David sent out spies, more scouts, and then he understood Saul was come in very deed. Maybe there was some troops there and the color, the banners, and hey, well, that's Israelite troops. What are they doing in this area? And so maybe he thought, I wonder if they're coming, maybe there's an invasion from the Philistines. And he's got to go. So he verifies it. And so I just asked the question, why do you think David wanted further verification of Saul's approach? Even as if, and I put as if, it doesn't say he was surprised, but he went to verify it. He wanted he wanted to make sure that he was correct. Why do you think, in a sense, that he may have been like, why is Saul here? Why would that be surprising? Think of chronologically what had happened already.
Previous time, David did not kill Saul when he had the chance, told him about it, and Saul admitted he was wrong.
Yeah, so Saul, I'm sorry, I cut you off, Brother Crinky, go ahead. Yes, so part of in that encounter, that King Saul says, I have sinned. I was wrong, David. I shouldn't be out here. I shouldn't be doing this. You're right. I'm wrong. You spared my life. And apparently, it seems as though, so when Saul's coming again, he's going, what's going on? This can't, and I'm saying this in light of something that we'll see in just a little bit, but I think David was totally flabbergasted. Why would he even be coming at this time? It doesn't make any sense. And I mentioned Saul confessed his sin, and we're not going to, that's at the end of chapter 24. So just keeping that in mind as we go through here. So when David verified the position of Saul's camp, he purposely went there. He asked 2 men, hey, who would like to go with me? And Abishai, his nephew, said he would go. So at night, they went into their camp. And the idea, it says Saul was in a trench. So they may have dug a place just for him to lay, but it says the troops were sort of in circles around him. Okay, so just like, remember the tabernacle, how it was, and then you had the priests on one side and the 3 tribes of Levite on the other sides, and then the 3 tribes and 3 tribes and 3 tribes. And so the Ark of God was right in the center. So it's similar how they did with the king. They put him in the center and put, the main people around him, and then probably 2 or 3 circles around him to make sure he was safe. I thought, it doesn't say this, but from what happens here, do you think David would know how that setup was? I would think so. How it would normally set up, because he was fighting for the king for a long time. So he went into the camp with Abishai, took his spear, took his water pitcher that was right beside King Saul. So when in the camp, verses 8 and 9, what did Abishai tell David? So maybe just read there 8 and 9. Let's have someone read it for us, and then maybe summarize it after you read it. So someone like to read those for us? Stephen, would you read those for us? Okay, so what was Abishai's idea? Yeah, and he says, I'll take him and I'll put that spear right through him. It'll stick into the earth, and I won't have to stab him again. It'll be over. I'll put it probably right through his heart, and so he won't make a sound, and he'll be out, and we'll be done. And then, of course, David's idea, as he mentioned earlier, how can you lift your hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? Steve, could you read verse 10 as well? This was interesting to me, and what I want you to think about, where was David's focus at this time, especially in verse 10? Could you read verse 10 as well?
David said, furthermore, as the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him, or this day shall come to die, or he shall descend in battle and perish.
Okay, so David just says, more or less, he says, I'm trusting God. God could take him out, I think is the first one there. The Lord may smite him, or his day may come to die. What do you think he means by that second phrase? The day may come that he may die. Yeah, live out his life. And you wonder, David or Saul's out in the battlefield, so it's not like he's it's not like he's going around and he's got from his tallness he's maybe got bad knees and a bad back and he's walking around and having people carry him, all that kind of stuff. No, he's still out in the battlefield. And so, wow, that's a long time. And David just says, I'm going to trust God. God may take him out. He may live a full, long life, or he may die in the battle. But he said, it's not up to me. And I think that just tells us a lot. And you could read through the Psalms, wait on the Lord. And that was the whole theme of 24, 25, and 26. Wait on the Lord. You just don't know. Just do right. But wait on the Lord and do good, as the Bible says there. Okay, let me go. Oops, I thought I had another question there. So anyway, Saul gets down to there, and David again spares Saul's life as he was there. Didn't listen to Abishai. What was that? Why was this covert operation successful in verse 12? I thought this was just a little side note. I thought it's really neat. Yeah, because God, what did he do?
He had them all in each.
Yeah, so he's going through I don't know if they were snoring, but he's going through the camp. And man, think about what he's doing. If they're all circled around the king, and so he's got to go by several lines of soldiers, that are right there. And it doesn't say, but maybe God gave David peace to go forward in that. Now remember the other one, God brought Saul to him by a set of circumstances. This time David goes into Saul, into the camp, and takes care of that. So David put a valley, it doesn't really say a valley, but a good distance, and then he got up on a hill, so I just put a valley between him. Shouted to Abner, the king's captain, and said, but you have failed. What are you doing? Someone came into camp today or tonight, and it was night, and he says, someone came in your camp tonight and took the king's, you weren't keeping him safe, took his spear. He asked him later, where's the spear, where's his water? But yeah, he gets on Abner for not protecting the king through the situation there. He asks, where is the king's water and such. And so then Saul recognizes David's voice, and David asked Saul what stirred him to pursue David again. See, and that's why I said when he first saw Saul, he wanted to verify it, because he's saying, why is he out here again? He confessed his sin in chasing me down. I thought he got right with God. I thought he got these things taken care of. I just thought remember sometimes people do things against you and then they tell you they're sorry, and something may stir them up again. And so that's what he's asking King Saul. So just a couple things. Verse 19. What two options? Let's read those verses there. Let's just read 17 after he talks with Abner. So 17 through, let's go down through, let me see this second, 20. I got some notes here. I'm trying to find out where I wanted to go to. Let's read down through verse 20. So someone like to read 17 through 20 for us? Okay, Steve.
So then Saul heard David's voice and said, it is thy voice, my son David. And David said, it is my voice, my lord, O king. He said, wherefore does my lord thou pursue after his servant? What have I done? Or what evil is in my hand? Now therefore I pray, let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. The Lord hath stirred thee up against me
Okay, so as we go through, so what two options did David mention about why Saul may be pursuing him? What did he say there in verse 19? Yeah, if the Lord stirred you up, so David says, hey, if God is telling you to do this, then what does David say the option should be? If somehow I have sinned and done wrong and you're pursuing me because I have done some evil thing, and that's, he begins with, hey, what have I done? Verse 18, and, what evil is in my hand? So, but he said, if the Lord stirred you up to chase me down, then David says, what's the solution? Yeah, God will accept an offering. Let me know what I've done. And if I've done wrong, I'll be willing to go to God and give this offering. And then what's the other one he says? Yeah, men. And what does he say should happen to those people? What does he say? They're under what? Yeah, they're cursed. So anybody have an idea why David says that? Yeah, you could go back to the aspect of the priests being killed. There's another thing that I thought was, I asked that here, why does David say some are to be cursed? Back in Deuteronomy 13, it said if a prophet, and that's I think the first 5 or 6 verses, or a family member, that's the latter part of that section, directs one to go serve other gods. In other words, they're preaching on some other god besides the true and living God. He said they were to be stoned, and obviously if you got stoned to death, you probably were cursed. Okay? So I think that's what David's saying. Hey, you're telling me, notice the very end of it, I can't abide in my inheritance. That would be contrary to God as well. But being away from that, go serve other gods. I think this is part of why David was called a man after God's own heart. We find Solomon, we find, kings through, not all of them, but many of them, especially in the north, but also some in the south, who worshiped idols. And David, and especially where we're going to this morning, I'm not sure how far we'll get there, but David is never found worshiping an idol. Never find him going somewhere else, Baal, Ashtaroth, none of those. We don't find him doing that. And I think that's interesting that the thing that he mentions here is you push me out of the land, you're saying go serve another god. And I think that's why he says what he says here, that let them be cursed, because that's what God has already said. In other words, David's not making this up on his own. He's saying God already said doing such a thing is to bring a curse upon someone. Any questions or comments on that? I thought that was really an interesting thing there. What did David liken Saul's actions to? And he did this earlier as well. What are you doing, king? It's like you're doing this. You're looking for what? A flea. Or like a partridge on the mountain. And I just thought maybe he's saying as when one doth hunt a partridge, and maybe it's a specific partridge on the mountain. And this mountain of, 10 square miles. You got to find what's one bird you're looking for. You're going to have trouble finding it. And it's worthless. So you're going to waste your time. So how did David respond to Saul's confession of his sin, his invitation to return, his promise not to retaliate? Let me just read those. Then Saul said, I have sinned. Return, my son David, and I will no more do thee harm, because my soul was precious in thine eyes this day. Behold, I have played the fool and have erred exceedingly. And David answered and said, behold, the king's spear, and let a young man come over to fetch it. The Lord render to every man his righteousness and his faithfulness, for the Lord delivereth thee into my hand today, but I will not stretch forth my hand. I would not stretch forth my hand against the Lord's anointed. Now let me just finish reading. And behold, as thy life was much set by this day in mine eyes, so let my life be much set by in the eyes of the Lord, and let him deliver me out of all tribulation. So what does David say? Hey, I've done wrong. Come on back, and I'll take care of you. You'll be safe. Well, yeah. So he said it before. So what is David's response? Does he say, oh man, that's great. Hey, King Saul, let's have a hug? What's the first thing he says after that statement in verse 22? Yeah, so what would if David was accepting the invitation, what would David have done? Yeah. Hey, King, thank you so much. Here's your spear. Here's your pitcher of water. Man, I'm so glad to be back home. That's not what he does. I think what he says, I can't. I can't. I can't trust you. And he says, may the Lord render every man's righteousness and faithfulness, and may the Lord deliver me as may I be big in God's eyes, just as you were big in my eyes today. I spared you, and so may God spare my life. And so he says, I'm not going to put my life in your hands, King Saul. I'm going to trust God. And wow, that's maybe one day it doesn't happen, but maybe one day, if things would have been different, obviously they weren't. So hearsay. But maybe if Saul had shown himself faithful to the Lord, there might have been a day where David felt comfortable coming back. But Saul had not shown himself trustworthy either to the Lord or to his friends. I just think that's an interesting scenario there. So Saul knew, verse 25 there, then Saul said to David, blessed be thou, my son David, thou shalt, no, I think this is interesting. Again, he confessed before he knew David would be king. Again, he says it here, thou shalt both do great things and also shalt prevail. So David went his way and Saul returned to his place. So I think this is the last time they see each other or talk to each other. I may not have that right, but I know it's one of the last. Okay. So again, similar to what was the earlier episode with King Saul, again, the second one there, do good and trust God to deal with his enemies. Any questions or comments on that? I just thought that's an interesting scenario. Yes, Rick?
Going back to how he reacted just right before this with Nabal, and how he wanted, it was just that he became personal to him, and the Lord was gracious to him in allowing somebody who was wise and acting
Right.
wisely at that moment to stop him from making a foolish decision, and then that helped him in this situation too.
Yeah, I'm sure it had a similar.
So many times we go back and forth making wise decisions, making poor decisions.
Well, yeah, that was being my next point on this, but yes. So the story really shifts now, and so that's why I've entitled this section, Living with the Enemy. David had been waiting on the Lord, 24 through 26, and God just working in situations, but now he begins to live with the enemy, and so David flees to Philistia. I want us to read, someone read verse 1 for us and think about this question. What did David tell himself about his situation? So someone like to read verse 1 for us? Anybody else? Okay, Rick.
David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape into the land of the Philistines. And Saul shall despair of me to seek me any more in any coast of Israel. So shall I escape out of his hand.
Okay, so what in a sense, what do you, as you read those, what do you see in David's mind, the way he's thinking? Now, and really at the beginning and David said in his heart. So here is David talking to himself. Okay, we do, in fact, folks, you talk to yourself more than anyone else talks to you. And you're not like, when I was in Wenatchee, there was this, for a while there was a open concert. This church at lunchtime had a big organ, and they'd have people come in there and they'd play the organ for people, and you could go in there and you could see, they had wooden pews and wooden floors, and you could go there and take your lunch, and it was called, I don't know, it was something lunch in the park or lunch at church, or I don't remember what it was. So we took my kids were probably all under 12 or something, and so we went in there a couple times, and just, it was a nice music, and so we went in there and we sat way in the back because our kids, we didn't want to, in case they were disturbing, we'd take them out. But right in front of us, about 2 rows, and there wasn't very many people in the whole church. There was a lady, and she was talking, and this was before cell phones, and so she was talking, and then she'd answer in a little different voice, and what we found out, she was communicating with herself. She was known around town. You see her every once in a while, and she's talking to herself, walking from place to place. But so that's not what I mean when I'm saying David was talking to himself. You know, we all do that. We tell ourselves about a situation. We tell ourselves how other people are feeling, though we don't have that sovereignty to know for sure. But we say this and say that to ourselves. And so David's speaking to himself here. And in a sense, something changed. Go ahead.
He wasn't trusting in the Lord at this time, even though the Lord had just saved him from Saul the second time.
Right, and so there, you know, we saw he's waiting on God, he's trusting Him, he's depending on Him. In fact, back there where we looked at, trying to remember which verse it was, where he said, one day, you know, when his Abishai said, "Go ahead and kill Saul," and he says no, and then one day he will. The Lord will smite him, or the day shall come that he'll die, or he'll go into battle and perish. God will take him out. And here he's saying, you know what? Saul's going to take me out. I may perish one day from the hand of Saul. So who is he now going to be looking to for his protection? Yeah, the world. Yeah, the Philistines. He's going to go where he ought not to be going, and so. Yeah, wow, it's really, so that's why I say it's a change of the scenario and situation. And I just thought, you know, how even the best of people can sometime, I'll get to you in a moment, sometime muddle their thinking about God, about the Lord. And the devil wants to throw those fiery darts in there all the time. And I'm just saying we need to be cautious. Don't think, hey, I'm exempt from that. I always think right. Wait. Be careful. Because under the right pressures, the right circumstances, the right situation, I mean, the devil will throw those fiery darts. He can't read your mind, but I think those fiery darts affect the way we think, but he can't read your mind, but he can read everything going on around you. He can read every facial expression. It's really interesting from our creationist perspective. There are more, I forget if it's bones or muscles or tissue somehow in your skull that your face, far more than any chimpanzee, you know, and thinking of the evolutionary side, our faces can so move that and express what we are feeling in our heart, and the devil can read our faces. And so he knows, and he'll know when to throw it. Yeah, Brother Arden?
Well, I think David at this point knows that as long as Saul is alive, he is not safe. This is reminiscent of Jonah, escaping from the Lord. He is more or less escaping from his helpless or hopeless situation. That is, that he cannot kill Saul. God has to kill Saul. So he wants to get where he doesn't have to battle with that
Right,
every day.
right.
He kills Saul when he knows he can.
Right, and so that's, yeah, it's all this. Again, there is I think a shift in his thinking just a little bit, though because now he's saying I got to go out. He just said, "You're forcing me out of the country," you know, and I think that's the thing. I just put he was discouraged, he was weary, you know, and obviously he wasn't trusting the Lord like he should have, at least from our perspective. It just seems that way. I don't want to be too high. I was thinking, I don't want to be hypercritical because David's a great hero of the faith to me, you know, and I think, man, I want to criticize him, but at the same time, because I see, you know, what's it say in James that Elijah was a man subject to like passions as we are, and yet God used him in a great way, and so we need to recognize that. So I just said his thinking, and you don't have to go there. Just seems to shift a little bit from, hey, I'm going to trust God, as Brother Krinky mentioned, and now it seems to shift a little bit. Where did David go with his men? In verse 2. And why is that startling? Yeah, so David went from where he was at, the wilderness of Ziph, went over to Gath. Why is that surprising? Yeah, the Philistines, but there's another episode in David's life that it makes that even more surprising. Pardon? Yes, and then, but what happened? Remember when he first was saying, I got to get out of here. King Saul's going to kill me. This is after Jonathan and him said, hey, You're not gonna, it's not gonna work, and you can't stay here. My dad's after you. And he flees, and he goes somewhere, and he ends up dribbling on himself. Yeah, that was in Gath. Okay. Yeah, that was right here. Okay, same place. Okay, and pardon? Yes. So when it says he went to Achish, now it does say the son of Maok, the king of Gath, and I'm not sure, it seems that there's a difference of opinion, and I sort of side with this a little bit, that Achish was a title, not so much just the guy's first name. This is Achish, the king of, just like Caesar, the king of Rome, or the president of the United States. And so that Achish may have been a title and not just a name or a name adopted, and so it may be a different guy, maybe the same guy. Now, I did the best I could understand, and this is not absolutely, I can't find it anywhere exactly in Scripture, but someone said it may have been about 7 years since that first initial visit to Gath, and so this may have been, a different guy there. So not sure all about that, but it is amazing where he goes to flee out of there. I just say, why was it a bit odd? What new information is given about David's group in verse 3, which I think this is interesting too. Of course, I always say that. It's interesting. I find it interesting. Yeah, the families are with him. And maybe so now, because when David was in the wilderness, the men were there, but everyone had their families back home. So now their families are with them as they head to Gath. Philistines, false gods everywhere, no worship of Jehovah, and we're taking our families. Okay, just an interesting new thing. Did David's hope of verse 1 come true? Yes, it did. So Saul saw that David was in Gath, and he sought him no more. So he was safe. So after a time, I don't know what that time was. I was going to say a short time, but I'm not sure how long. He doesn't really say. That David asked Achish for a town in the country for his men and their families, and he gave him Ziklag. So just so you get an idea. So Gath is quite a ways up here. Jabez is where Jerusalem would eventually be. So again, it's east and down to the further south part there. So make note of how far that was to the south. So that tells you, apparently Gath seems to be the capital of Philistia, and so Ziklag was part of that. And so David heads down to Ziklag. So verse 7 says he spent a year and 4 months. I believe it says the way it's written. Yeah, a year and 4 months. So the situation where he was in either Ziklag or at least been Philistine territory was 16 months of time there. And then what did David do while he was there? Let's read 8 and 9. Someone like to read those two, filled with names for you to pronounce. Someone like to read those two? Okay, Brother Crinky.
And David and his men went up and invaded the Geshurites and the Perizzites and the Amalekites, for those nations were of old the inhabitants of the land, as thou goest to Shur, even unto the land of Egypt. And David smote the land, and left neither man nor woman alive, and took away the sheep and the oxen and the asses and the camels and the apparel, and returned, and came to Achish.
Okay, so I think I have this on a map. So just so you understand, his invading was down to the south. So David's raids took place there. And then notice, what do you notice? Okay, we didn't read verse 10, so you have to read that. But compare verse 8 and verse 10. What difference do you see in those two verses? So between verse 8 and verse 10, do you see a difference there? What's that? Yeah, he did not tell Achish the truth. And And so that's, I put why is there a difference there? Why is there different in the accounts? Because one is what he did, verse 8. Verse 10 is what he told Achish. Okay, and so let me just go, I don't think I go to a map again. Let me see. Oh, I guess I do a little bit later, but let me go back there just a second. So what David said was, I'm going to the south of Judah, I'm going to the south of Jerahmeelites, I'm going to the south of the Kenites. So that was called the Negev, and that's this whole area down in here. Negev means south. And so it wasn't necessarily, way over here, but he was telling the king when he went up to Gath and brought some booty from the robberies and the raids and everything, that he told him, hey, we were going down here and down here and down here. That's where we were doing these invasions. So he was not telling him the truth about where he was going. So to me, it's an interesting thing that goes on here. In fact, I want you to notice verse 6 a moment of 27. Then Achish gave him Ziklag that day, wherefore Ziklag pertaineth unto the kings of Judah unto this day. It never went back to the Philistines. And it's almost like God was providentially directing this whole affair. As David, because notice verse 8. What does it say about those three different groups of people there? There's something that's in the text that tells us this was okay. Yeah, they were the original inhabitants. God said, I want them out of there. And so David's fulfilling what God had said a long time ago to Israel when they came out of the land of Egypt. And so that's part of where it says there about, as you go from even unto the land of Egypt. So all of that land was supposed to be Israel's. So Achish, it says in verse 12 that he believed David about this. And so that's, he hath made his people Israel. Notice there, he believed David. And he's thinking, okay, he's made Israel to utterly abhor him. Therefore shall he be my servant forever. So he was thinking, hey, I've got him. He's with me. We'll need to stop there. So any questions, comments on some of that? It's nice to know God is bigger than us. Later on, I do mention, I'm trying to see where that verse is. I thought I wrote it out. I don't see it now. It's from Jeremiah. It says, Jeremiah 10, verse 23 says, O Lord, I know that the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps. Now, that's not denying the reality of you make choices, you make steps, you go the direction you want to, but he says ultimately God's sovereignly over even your choices. And he will direct those things in a way that will ultimately fulfill his plan and his purpose in our lives. Okay, let me stop there. Father, thank you again for who you are and for your goodness to us. Lord, help us